So last week we started, whoops, here, this is better. Last week we did this, and we also did, we actually started with a thumbnail of this drawing. If I can find it. It's on this other page right here. So we started by doing a thumbnail of this drawing. And some of you did a more simple version, some of you did the full version, and some of you decided to do their own interpretation of the same thing, which is fine. It's all good. And then as a homework, I asked you to draw it on a 9x12 piece of paper, so in your sketchbook. Now, I also said if you prefer to do a scene that you would prefer to paint, then you can do that too. So this is my example, and I had also shown more simple examples of the drawing. I don't know if I have one in this book. So a more simple example of this drawing would be if you just did this portion of the drawing. So you only have this mountain and then the mountain in the back. You don't have the whole full thing. And that would be good too, especially if you're a beginner. Then I encourage you to make it simple so that when you paint it, it would give you something that would be simple like this. And something that you can do in the 2-hour class. So now I'm going to stop the recording. Pause. And I'm going to mute you all. If you need to ask any questions or interrupt me during the explanation, feel free to do so. So I want to talk a little bit about our supplies. So to paint today, all you need is 3 colors. I mean, if you have a whole slew of other colors, feel free to use them. But all that you need truly is a yellow. So the yellow that I usually recommend is the Canyon Yellow Medium. 1 red, and the 1 red that I usually recommend is the Alizarin Crimson. And 1 blue, and the blue that I recommend to start with is the Ultramarine blue, this one. And when you buy watercolor paint, you can buy it in tubes, like these little tubes, and these are different brands. So this one here is the Coatman watercolor, and this one here is the Winsor Newton Professional. So that's also this one is Winsor Newton Coatman. That's more of a student grade. This one, the Winsor Newton Professional, that's more of a professional grade. And then my red is actually a Daniel Smith Extra Fine watercolor. So the more you get grades that are professional, the more expensive the paints will be. And last week at the end of the class, I had sent you an email with all of this information. But I also want to talk a little bit about what you're going to use to mix your paints. So this is an example of what you could use to mix your paints. See, it's got little wells. And in my case, I had used this to paint yesterday, and now it's all dried up. So that's why I can hold it this way. If I had paint that was all watery in it, I couldn't hold it this way. But you can see how I have, oh, this one is actually running. So I have my blue here, this one, this is my ultramarine blue. And then I also have my red, this is the alizarin crimson red. And then I have my yellow right here, which is my yellow Canyon medium. And using the yellow and the red, I had created some orange and some Indian yellow or lighter orange. And then using the ultramarine blue and my yellow, I had created some green here. So even though I don't have any green on, you know, that from my tubes, I can make green by mixing the blue and the yellow, and I can make orange by mixing the the yellow and the red. So those are things that that I recommend doing, so that when you paint, I didn't realize this was running, but when you paint, then if you have to make your orange all the time, then the orange will vary slightly, and it will make it more interesting. Because in nature, when you look at the forest, it's very rare that the green of the tree that is on the left will be exactly the same as the green on the tree on the right. And there's like a million different shades of these greens. So making your greens help paint something that is more realistic and resembles more the actual forest. So now this is one example. You could also, some of you maybe have something that is bigger. Mine it's very old, and I even cracked it when I dropped it. But anyway, so this is another way, another kind of support where you can mix your paints in these little wells. Some are bigger, some are smaller, and that's also something that could be used. And for paper, we talked a little bit about paper, but I have used this, which is a watercolor paper block. And when I open it up, because it's glued on all sides, you can see it's all glued. So I don't have to tape the paper anywhere. It's ready to paint on. All right. Any questions about the supplies before we start painting? Okay.
There.
Yes.
If we don't have the tube paint, can we use the other kinds of paints?
Yes, absolutely. So I forgot to mention that, and I have it right here. So you can also buy something like this, which is, it's a paint that comes in paints. And you can absolutely use something like this. They have all different kinds of formats. This is Winsor Newton Coatman. And in this little case comes here, well, it's rather empty, but anyway, there's a cerulean blue, and there's an ultramarine blue, and there is a canyon yellow pale, canyon yellow medium, and there's also a canyon red pale, canyon red medium, and alizarin crimson, and this is another type of red. It's called purple lace. Purple lake, anyway. So if you want to use the same colors that I recommended, you can use the ultramarine blue, the canyon yellow medium, and the alizarin crimson, which is the 3 colors that I said. But if you don't have these specific colors, use, you know, the yellows that you have and the blues that you have and the reds that you have. It'll work fine too. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you so much.
Okay. Now, if you have something like this, I'm going to mention this one last thing about the medium. So if you have a little box like this, and see this one here, the alizarin crimson, it's almost empty. And I still have a lot of some of the colors in here. So what I do is, instead of, you know, buying a whole new box, you can buy these little paints individually. So you can just replace a paint, or you can buy a tube of paint and squeeze some in, and now you have your box is full again. So those are 2 options. Okay. So we're going to start painting, and to paint, so to start the painting, what I wanted to do was I wanted to show you a little video of how to paint the sky. So to do this, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go to my little video. So I did it in parts. So this one is just painting. It's just painting the sky. So I did it on the very simplified version. And to paint the sky, I turned the canvas completely upside down, and I put it on a little incline, and I wet the whole sky. And before I wet the sky, I even had prepared my, blue in a little well, sufficient blue to cover the whole thing. So now I'm wetting the whole sky upside down. This way I know it's not going to run into the other sections. And once I've wet the whole thing, that's when I'm going to paint it. And this allows, by wetting the whole thing before I start painting, it allows for the it allows me to paint it without having any interruption or creating any lines. So when it's all shiny, the whole thing, then I use my biggest brush, because that's a pretty large section. And see, you can see I had prepared my my blue there with ultramarine blue, and I was not able to incline this too much because it was wet. And I'm using a large brush, as you can see, and I'm dipping the whole thing in my blue, and then I'm painting it. Look at this, nice. And because it's already wet, it is spreading very easily, and it's running towards the bottom. Because it's upside down, then the bottom will become the top of my sky when I turn it upside up. And if you ever have observed the sky is always slightly lighter on the horizon line than right above your head. So painting it upside down is good because it allows the pigments to run towards the top of the sky and creating a lighter horizon line. And then when it accumulates too much, I pick it up with my brush and I wipe it on my paper towel. And now I'm going to create my cloud. So while it's still wet, I dry my brush on the paper towel, and I remove some pigment. So I'm creating somewhat of a long cloud, like so. And because I'm doing this while it's still wet, it will create very soft edges, which is what usually you have in the clouds in the sky. Voila. So now it's still wet, but it will dry, and I can show you how it looks like when it's dry, because I have it right here next to me. So is there any questions on this? Or I should show you actually. So my sky here, this is what I just did the demonstration of this sky. See how the cloud has very, very soft edges? And that's because when I removed the pigment, the overall sky was all still wet. So now, is there any questions about this? Recording, share my screen, and show you the slideshow again. Oh, slideshow is here. Slideshow is here. All right, so this mountain here, I do not have it on my example that I'm going to show you. I did not record. But when painting watercolor, I like to go from the back towards the front. So if we were to paint this, which eventually, when I went to the next phase, I made it this color. See, it's kind of like a green, an olive green color. So if we were to paint this as your next step, what I would say is we're going to paint this yellow here and also cover this section with the yellow. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to paint this, including the grouping on of trees on the right hand side. And we're also going to paint this section. All of this we're going to do in an Indian yellow. So if I make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see better. So this whole section here, including this grouping of trees, we're going to do this Indian yellow. And I'm going to show you the recorded demonstration, and then I'm going to demonstrate also on my piece of paper that I have here. I have a complex scene on this paper, so I'll show you afterwards. So I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to go back to the videos and do the part 2. So now we're going to paint this. And to paint this, I prepared colors. So I prepared the yellow. I also prepared a nice Indian yellow. It's like a yellow ochre with a lot of yellow and just a little bit of alizarin crimson. And then I also prepared more of an orange. So I used the yellow and the Indian yellow, a little bit of orange to cover this section. And to start with, I always like to wet the whole paper. And when you wet a section next to another section, make sure you don't leave a white line in between. So right now I'm wetting all the way to the sky without leaving any kind of white area or dry area between this mountain section and the sky to the right. And if you have a very good brush, you can wet the whole paper or almost the whole paper without having to dip it in the water again. Now this whole section is kind of shiny. It's hard to see. But anyway, this is ready to be painted now. So I use my big brush again. See the colors that I've prepared? So I have the Indian yellow, and the yellow, and then I have the orange there. So I'm going to dip into a bit of orange, bit of Indian yellow, and I put a lot of it on my brush. See how rich, nice and rich it looks? And then I go very straight along this line. This is where the mountain is near the water. I can go a long way without dipping my brush back into my color because I have a lot of pigment in my mix, and this brush is a good watercolor brush, so therefore it has a lot of pigment on it. It can carry a lot of color and a lot of water. See, I didn't even go back to dipping again, and I'm all done. And I made sure that I did not leave any white space between the yellow mountain and the blue sky. And here there's a little bit of accumulation. I pick it up with a dry brush. Voila. And I left it this way to dry so that it becomes a little bit darker at the bottom than at the top. Then once it had gone lower, then I realized I was just a little bit too much. So I picked up a little bit of this color with a dry brush. So that's it. Okay, so if I go back to stop sharing, if I show you the results, so once it dried like this. So some of it is lighter at the top, darker at the bottom, and it's what we want. We do want it to be not completely equal. everywhere. Now, if I were to demonstrate on the more complex version of our painting, I will do it right here. It's better like this, and I'm gonna share this other. So if you feel like comfortable that you want to go ahead and start painting, don't wait for me to finish this demonstration, just go ahead. But I'm going to show you, and before I show you, I'm going to do this a little darker so you can see. So this is my drawing, like this. So this is the mountain in the back. This is the other mountain. And I don't recommend that you do this. I'm just doing this so you can see better, you know, the different sections. And then this is my grouping of trees on this side. The water. And then the other water. And this is the other grouping of trees on this side. So you can see now, what I'm going to cover with yellow is this mountain, and this grouping of trees. Even if I have, like, I have my little, you know, my little pine trees here, like this. Well, I'm still going to cover all of this with yellow. So the yellow that I want is basically, I can reuse these, even though they're dried up. I'm going to wet them again and just use them. So this is my yellow. And this is my orange.
Come look if you want.
Hey, Mom.
Yeah.
Could you please mute yourself, Mom? Maybe I'll mute everybody. That'll be easier. Yes, okay. So continuing with this. So now I have all of this, and I'm just going to use this other brush. So you have this portion that is the sky that's already painted, and now I'm going to wet. Oh, you can't really see very well because the light is no good. Maybe if I go like this, you might see better. No, not good. If I go like this, you'll be able to see. So I'm going to put it this way, try my best to work this way so you can see. So now we're going to paint this section. So I'm wetting this section, also this section, all the way around like this, all the way to the water, all of this, these two mountains, all the way to the sky. You guys, you have painted your sky already. On this example, I haven't done the sky yet. I should have done it, but anyway. And I'm going to include this section here of this grouping of trees, including the pine, I mean the Christmas trees, or the evergreens, because the evergreens and all of this will paint on top to make it darker afterwards. So this whole section, this mountain, this grouping of trees, I'm going to paint yellow. And now that's why I wet everything. It's like an Indian yellow. So this color, ooh, nice. So I'm going around here, doing this little in between, the mountain in the back, making sure that I go all the way to the line, not leaving any space between the mountain and my sky. For you. So I'm going here. Now against the water, following the line. Very good. And then I'm also covering this whole section here. So I can't really see very well, but I'm going to show you. So I've done this all of this. So the mountain in the back, this mountain, this grouping of trees, including the evergreens. And as I'm holding it, it's running down a little bit, and there's a little bit too much water here, so I'm going to pick it up with a brush. So to pick it up with a brush, I dry my brush on a paper towel, and I just go like this. Now I've picked it up. There's just too much. Same thing here. Here. So sometimes it might be a little darker, a little lighter, depending on how much pigment you have in your color, but this is the first step. So I'm gonna let it dry. And now what we're gonna do is this whole section here, which is where the reflection is going to be, we're gonna do a first coat of the Indian yellow color. So that's fairly simple. And see, I painted my sky. So to do this, I just wet the whole thing and then paint it. Now make sure you completely clean your brush if you have done another color in between, like I did with the blue, because otherwise this color will be tainted. And also, I would recommend, highly recommend that you make sure to have sufficient of this nice Indian yellow color. So I go here, I cover this whole thing with my water. I'm actually going to put it sideways so you guys can see better. So there. And once it's all wet, then I'm going to put my Indian yellow. Right here. It's a large section. And I'm just going to do the overall with this color. There. It's fairly easy. Now we're at a point where we are going to paint this mountain. So we've already painted this yellow. Now we're going to go over it with the color that we're going to use is, we're going to use, I did it differently. So we're going to use like a little bit of a purpley color. And because it's yellow under, it's going to create this color that we see here. And to make the purple color, I'm going to use some of the alizarin crimson mixed with some of the blue, the ultramarine blue. So if I were to show you, I need to wet my alizarin crimson. It had dried up from the last time. And this alizarin crimson is very, very, very pigmenty. So I'm going to do this in a separate well. So I'm going to put some alizarin crimson. I don't need a whole lot of it. So some alizarin crimson. I'm just getting more water from my And then I'm gonna put some blue in it. The blue's right next to it. But before I put my brush in the blue, I want to clean it completely so I don't contaminate my blue with the red. Now I'm gonna get, oh, probably all of the blue. Mix it with this red. And actually, I'm a little short on blue because this is a little bit like a magenta color. So I'm gonna use more blue.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot to mute you guys. You can mute yourself. So I've added a little bit more blue here. Yeah, this is good. So if you're unsure what color you've just made, you can always use a paper towel and just smear on it. Then you'll be able to see what color you just made. It looks dark on the camera, but it's a nice deep purple. So what I'm gonna do to paint this section here is I'm gonna wet this, and I'm gonna use just a little bit of this nice deep purple that I made to make it more brown. And now I'm using a smaller brush because I have some smaller areas. So I'm wetting this. I'm almost working flat because I don't want this to run. And if you have good brushes, you can go a long way with the water that you have gotten the first time you dip the brush into the water. So I'm painting on top of the original color that we had. And you don't want to put too much water on here. So seeing now, I realize I have a little bit too much. So I'm picking it up with my brush. Now I'm dipping into my well, just a teeny little bit. This purple is very, very dark. So I'm gonna put some water with my well, with the purple, and now I'm gonna put it here. Look at this, nice. So I'm painting this mountain here, a purple on top of the yellow. And see, I'm not even going back to the well to get more of the purple color because I don't want it to be too dark. There. And I'm making sure I'm going all the way to the sky color. No white spot between this and the sky color. Same here. So now I have this. And this mountain recedes to the back. There. Now you can do it. We are also going to paint another section of this yellow, but first, you guys can do this. So next step that we're going to do, I think it's important that we cover this part of the water. Now this part of the water is actually where the ripple, for me it's very skinny. On my example that I had done, it's a little bit bigger. So it can vary. This part of the water here is going to be reflecting, it's actually where the ripple is. So it's kind of like a very light blue. And so therefore, all we have to do is wet the section and put a little bit of ultramarine blue right over here. So this one I'm going to demonstrate now on this. And I'm using my skinny brush because it's a very skinny little area for me. And I'm actually going to go like this so that you guys can see and I can see, because I realized there is some kind of glare from my light. So I think you guys can see this. So I'm just wetting this with not too much water. I don't want it to run. Actually, I have a little bit too much, so dried it on my paper towel. There. So now it's wet. I'm taking a little bit of my ultramarine blue. I don't want it too pigmenty because I don't want it to be too dark. And I'm just going to put it right here. Make sure there's, oops, went over the line. Make sure it goes all the way to the line on either side. And all the way to this little corner here. There. So in the case of this painting, the lines will still show at the end because I wanted to make sure you guys could see my lines. But usually I would recommend not making the lines so dark so that at the end of your painting, the lines almost disappear. So now I have my water that has the ripple has been painted. So that's the next step. So our next step is to paint this section. And we're gonna paint this top part with a dark green. And before we paint this section, which is the reflection of it, we're just gonna add a little bit more water and a little bit more blue to paint this. So this is how we're gonna do this. I have prepared this here, which is my green, but I realized I might not quite have enough. So I'm gonna add a little bit of blue to it. I made it with my ultramarine blue, a mix of ultramarine blue and Canyon yellow medium. Now I'm gonna add a little blue to my green to make it just a tad darker. So this is how I do this. And mix it up. Oh, now it's a little dark, but it's actually a nice dark green. I don't know if you can see this. So this is a nice dark green. All right, so using my brush, I'm gonna wet this section here. I'm gonna do it like this. I think this way you can actually see what I'm doing a little bit better. I'm gonna go like this, with this section, all the way to my faraway mountain and my yellow mountain, all the way around. Yeah. And like this. So don't hesitate to turn your paper around if that's easier for you to touch a certain section. I'm not turning it because I want to make sure that the demonstration that you could see at the camera. So I've wet this whole section and now I'm going to paint it with my nice green. So I dip the whole brush into it and I really cover it with the dark green all the way to the line, not leaving any white in between. more paint. Nice. Nice and dark.
Looks nice.
And also here. Little point.
A little star on it.
Someone's talking. Maybe you can mute your microphone,
Yep, it's me.
please. All right. So now if I put it this way, it's gonna run. So I'm gonna put it flat and remove a little bit of the extra that is at the bottom, because I don't want it to run like it did on the paper, on the masking tape on the side. So now this is my grouping of trees, and I'm gonna let it dry flat because I don't want it to run. Now go ahead and do yours. Our next step is to paint this reflection here, right here. So to paint this reflection, when we paint it, we want to use this green. In this green, we're going to add a little bit more blue because we're painting on yellow. And so therefore, you want to add a little bit more blue to make a similar kind of green. Also, an object reflecting in the water usually reflects lighter if it's a dark object, like here. But when it's a lighter object, it will reflect darker in the water. That's just the law of nature. I didn't make this up. And next time you go by a lake and you see the reflection in the water, try to observe to see if that's what you see too. All right, so to paint this, I'm going to use this green that I have right here. Some of it, put it in my little well next to it, because I want to keep the same green that I had there without modifying it. And then I'm adding a little bit more blue, a little bit more blue to this green. So it's going to give a slightly darker green. But on this slightly darker green, I'm gonna put the water first on here. So I'm gonna go like this. Where is my water? Here it is. Using my smaller brush. So I'm gonna wet this section, wet the reflection part. And I'm going to make sure I leave a white space between the reflection and that grouping of trees. The white space, or the unpainted portion, will represent a little ripple of the water that takes place when the water hits the shore. All right, so now I've prepared this. Let's see, is this water good? Now, if you did not leave the space, it's okay, we can lift it. I'll show you how. I'll make sure that the reflection is in line. Like here, it's not quite in line, so I'm going to move it a little bit. It's in line with the object. There. So it gives something like this. It looks like a reflection. Pretty good.
Claire, I have another question.
Yes.
If you were outside, you know, on an easel and you were painting this scene in front of you,
Now using the same color that we used down here, I'm going to paint this little grouping of trees here. So I'm going to put it this way and wet my section very quickly. Because we want this grouping of trees to be slightly lighter than this one, because this grouping of trees is a little bit more behind, like it's a little further away from the viewer. And because it had the yellow under, and we're going with a little bit more watery color that has a little bit more blue. Yes, is there a question? Okay, whoever is talking now, could you please mute your microphone? Or maybe I will mute. Okay, let me see. All right, so just finishing this off. Okay, so now I have this, and since I already have this color, I'm gonna also move on to painting its reflection. And it's always better to wet first. So wet your canvas first. This section here. Like so. And these trees are a little further away from the water. I mean, from this section of the water. That's why they don't go all the way to the bottom. So I'm just indicating where this reflection is, because we're gonna come back to it. There. Indicating the reflection. Remember how this mountain here, or this tree, I'll go like this. This tree reflects, the reflections to start here, but it doesn't show in this section. So that's why it's not exactly starting at the same spot. Okay, and I also want to show you that if you didn't leave a white space here in between, because you just went through, I mean, you just painted all the way to the end. So what you do is you have a paper towel right here. Let's see, where can you see the paper towel? Yeah, right here. So you take a fine brush, you dry it on your paper towel like this, and then you will go here and just gonna wet this section in between. Don't make it too large, just a thin little thing. And then with a dry paper towel, you dry it like this. And so, for example, see here how it's touching? So now I'm going to use the brush very finely, finely, you know, brush over it. It just has a little bit of water in my brush. And then with my paper towel, I dry it, and see now it no longer has, they're not connecting anymore. So that's one way that you can recreate this little space. And once you have this white space, then you can, if you can decide to make it a little bit less bright with just a little teeny little bit of blue on it, not too much, just a little bit of blue right here in between. Not too much, so it's not so bright. There. Okay. So the section that I'm going to work on now is this, and then also this, and we'll add the little trees here. So if I show you on the example that's already finished, if you look here, so this mountain here has some very light color here, like in some areas, and some darker orange. And also in some areas it's even darker because I put some green into the orange to create those shapes. And here what I did is I wet this whole thing, and wet on wet I added some of the sky color, and I repainted some of the orange color, and also this. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to demonstrate this right now. Okay, so to paint this section again, first I want to make sure that I have prepared enough colors, and I do have yellow, and I do have this nice bright orange, and I still have some red, and I still have the green here and the other green, so I'm good to go. And I also have the blue. So make sure that you do that. Using my big brush, I'm going to re-wet this whole section on top of the yellow. So I'm going here and I'm doing this, wetting this whole section. I don't want to put too much water because I don't want it to run. So I'm drying my brush a little bit. There we go. Going all the way to here. Now I'm not touching the mountain in the back. I'm just doing the one in the front. Maybe you mute yourself, whoever we're hearing. Just better for the recording. So there. Now I've wet this whole thing. Now I'm going to use, so sometimes what I do is I put it on top, like I put it here, mix it with the other color on top like this. Now I want to, ooh, look at this nice color. Put a little bit more of this color, but not everywhere. So see, sometimes it's darker orange, sometimes lighter. And then sometimes it's just a yellow. So now I'm cleaning my brush using just a yellow because I want to have a variation of all these tones. So here I just have the yellow. Down here. So there, that's very interesting. And a little extra here that I don't want it to run. So I'm picking it up with the brush here as well. Here as well. Now, one thing that I can do with my dry little paper towel is create some shapes that are lighter, like maybe like tree-like shapes. I can do this. I don't know if you can see this. So this is what I've done so far. And with my paper towel, I can lift a little bit of color to create some tree shape. So I'm going to do it this way, just so I can see better. See, now I've created this. It's almost like some other shapes that are inside. And I did it with a dry paper towel. And in my orange, I'm going to add a little bit of green to also create some shapes. And it's still wet, so it's just an interesting kind of like, it doesn't create any sharp edges too much. So just because, you know, the forest has all sorts of different shapes and we don't always know why. And sometimes because there is some shadow or some different kind of trees. So now I've created this like this. Gives it a little bit of shape. And I'm going to let this dry. And while this is drying, using my dark green, I'm going to paint those pine trees right here. So maybe if I go like this. Now this is, I'm not wetting this area. I'm just painting without wetting. So the little pine trees, they're quite interesting. You don't want it to run, so you don't want to have too much water on your brush. This is my pine tree. Next one. I want to have enough pigment, but not too much water on my brush. So these two are pretty much together. And this one's just a skinny one. There. And of course I want to have the reflection of these, but before I do this, I'm going to wet this whole section because I'm going to repaint this whole section with the reflection of these trees. So this whole section, it's already been painted. I'm going to wet it again. And make sure that it touches on the reflection that we have already painted over here. Because we don't want to have this sharp edge on this section. So I've wet this whole section, but not this. And using this nice bright orange that I have here, because the reflection of this is in the water. So the reflection of this in the water will be slightly darker. Now this is a little too dark, so I'm using a little bit more white, more yellow. And I'm just repainting this. I'm letting it run. Very important, because I want something that's little, very soft in edges. Now it's running a little bit too much, but that's okay. And then with this, I'm gonna also re-add, this time I'm gonna add the sky color down here, like so. So that's how I can create the sky. And I hope you can see this. So this is the sky here at the bottom. And as I'm doing this, then I also have to add those little pine trees. I'm going to take my smaller brush and use that nice dark green that I have and put these reflected here. This one is the tallest, and this one's the fattest, but also not so, and this one is the skinniest. It's a little taller than the other one. And so this is going to dry flat, and I want to make sure that you guys can see it correctly, so I'm going to move this and show you what it looks like. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not easy. So like this. Like this. There. So now you can see it looks pretty much like a reflection. But I can't lift it too much because otherwise it's going to run a lot.